Everyone, to the last of our YANA program on careers and social impact. This is entitled Finding Meaningful Social Impact Engagement in Later Years, Opportunities and Obstacles. We are delighted that we had 140 registrants for this program, which is pretty high for us. And that's ranging from the class of 1957 through the class of 2018. And it's including graduates of Yale College, almost every graduate and professional school at Yale, and many new friends. As we know, YANA is not exclusive to Yale graduates. We really welcome anybody who's in the social impact space. The other great thing, and you can see this from the chat functions, is that people are calling in and joining us from like 25 different states. Last time I counted, from Alaska to New York, Michigan, Texas, Colorado, California, many more. So we've clearly hit a nerve, and I'm delighted that everyone is here to join us in this conversation. I do want to first thank my new friend, a cross-generational friend and fellow Yale, recently retired psychiatrist, Dr. Susan Warren, from the class of 73. She's in the Boston area. She really instigated the production of this program, and thank you for doing so much helpful research and thinking on this. And really, she's the one who helped me focus on the fact that there are many professionals and they're trying to come into contact or in contact with social impact, particularly who are 65 and older, and maybe they're approaching retirement, transitioning to retirement, maybe they're in retirement. And a lot of people want to be able to give back. They don't really know how to do it. They don't know where to start, or they're feeling frustrated because they've met a lot of obstacles along the way. So tonight's panelists are who are really all dedicated. They've got passion, curiosity, energy to the real and inevitable process of aging as part of our whole lives. They're going to help us explore a lot of these questions. Before we start, I do want to acknowledge that certainly how one gives back and what meaningful engagement means or what it looks like can vary significantly based on available time, resources, cultural and local traditions, geography, and of course, lots of other prejudices and obstacles that way. You know, for example, many people can't afford to retire or take on an unpaid adventure or volunteer their time, or they've got limited access to good and reliable transportation. So I've asked our panelists to address some of those matters relating to equity and inclusion in the remarks, and obviously we can continue the discussion if anybody has specific questions. But a lot of the themes that we're talking about are related to humans. And we really want to explore things that go beyond any occupation or class or identity. And we want to talk about some of the obstacles, and certainly a lot of the opportunities are there. Okay, logistics. We're recording this program. We'll have it posted on YouTube. We always share the link to the recording to all registrants. So if you have to drop off, or if you knew someone who can't make this, you'll have it in an email format, and they'll always be up on our YouTube channel. We will be monitoring the Q&A chat functions. So please, we'd love to hear from you. Where are you? Why are you tuned into this program? What are you looking for? It's just some nice feedback so everybody can see who's in the community. All right, so I want to jump in and meet our panelists. I'm not going to go through the full bios. You have those. I can include them in the chat function, but you should have received that with the invitation. So let's get started and jump right in right away. Marc, I'm going to start with you. You seem to be a pretty optimistic guy. You've said that aging is not a problem to be solved, but an opportunity to be seized through bridging generational divides. So I'm curious, how did that mindset start for you, and how did it lead you to found Encore?
Well, I'll give you the quick personal reason first, and then the professional odyssey, and keep both really short. But I was a terrible undergraduate. In my first 2 years, I managed to have 9 incompletes, which I think was maybe a Mid-Atlantic Conference record at the time. And at my college, the path to getting an incomplete ran through a 70-something dean, a guy by the name of Gil Stott. And after 9 incompletes, we were practically like family. And he really helped me get through college and left a kind of an indelible imprint on the role that older people can play in the lives of younger generations. And then when I started working, I had no thought that I'd go into the aging field. I was focused on young people growing up in poverty, and there was an abundance of research that one of the most important factors in kids making it against the odds was having a mentor, somebody who cared about them through longitudinal research. One of my favorite quotes is from Yuri Bronfenbrenner, one of the founders of the Head Start program, a human development scholar at Cornell, who said what every child needs is at least one adult who's irrationally crazy about them. And so, and thinking about how we could get more adults to play that role, even a quarter century ago, it seemed like the older population was a huge untapped resource. And I've since learned from Becca and others that there's it's more than just time and numbers, but older people have a lot of the qualities that young people so desperately need. And so, you know, the needs and the assets of the generations fit together like a jigsaw puzzle.
And tell us a little bit about Encore, like how you came to form that and what's the kind of hallmark of it.
You know, it started with, I co-founded a program with Linda Freed, who's the dean of the public health school at Columbia, called Experience Corps, which is essentially a Peace Corps for older people focused on helping kids in low-income neighborhoods read by the third grade. And there were two big lessons for us that came out of that experience. One is that unlike young people or anybody in a program like the Peace Corps, the Experience Corps members never left. They were from the same neighborhoods as the kids, 85% African-American, Latino, very few had gone to college, and they essentially had a second act in Experience Corps. It might not have been as long as their midlife work, but weighed as much. They oftentimes spend 10, 15 years in the program, and it gave us the idea of an encore career, a second act at the intersection of passion, purpose, and a paycheck. And, you know, it was a reminder too that it's not just the Jimmy Carters of the world who have the interest in doing this kind of work. In fact, we did research that showed that about 5 million Americans over 50 were in encore careers, but 21 million more said it was a top priority. And so a lot of our focus at Encore over the last decade or so has been to help people go from aspiration to action, to have these second acts for the greater good.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm sure we're going to come back with other questions for that. But we're on this second acts and careers. Jody, you're also working towards kind of the workforce, a better multi-generational aspect of that. And since we were the same high school class, you know, you're barely past 50-year-old age mark. And Ashton, I watched your TEDx. I loved your idea is that we're either old or future old. So we kind of qualify as future old. So Jody, I got to ask you, what shifted you? What led you to shift from corporate sales and marketing to public health, and then choosing work specifically in elder affairs and now at age-friendly org?
Thanks, Rachel. Thanks for having me. Rachel and I have known each other for over 30 years. So we've got some history here, and it's nice to be with you all. So I have a little bit of a personal professional story as well. The first chapter of my career was spent in sales and marketing, working for big publishing houses like Time Inc. and Condé Nast. And I knew while I was doing it that I hadn't found my passion or my purpose, but it was a really great career. And it allowed me to have a lot of flexibility and income while I was raising my children, who I had while I was quite young relative to some of my other peers. So earlier than most of my peers, the second chapter started coming at me fast. And I realized that I had an opportunity to try to create a second chapter for my career that was filled with a lot more intention and a lot more passion and purpose. And I started thinking, well, here I am in Boston and I'm working and thinking about this next chapter. What's a field where I've always had an affinity? And it occurs to me that I had always been drawn to older adults, and I had always in my life gravitated to the wisdom and the calm that I found when I was with older people. And so I started mapping out and thinking, my goodness, we have this incredible demographic change happening both here in the United States and elsewhere. Maybe there's an opportunity to craft a second chapter that combines this demographic reality with this personal passion of mine. And so at 45 years old, I went back to graduate school and I got a master's in public health at Boston University. And I took the opportunity to put the lens of aging populations on all the work I did in that program, whether it was in biostats or epidemiology or health law and policy. I just used that lens, and I thought, I'm going to learn everything I possibly can and figure out where I can make an impact. So that's what I did, and very quickly started to realize that there were lots of interesting opportunities, both in the policy and government side of things, but also in the innovations happening in the for-profit sector and social impact. So that was the impetus for getting involved with the Age-Friendly movement, which is a global movement looking to improve and enhance programming and policies for our fast-changing demographic, and to think about how we can deliver more age-friendly communities, more age-friendly health systems, more age-friendly workplaces, and what needs to happen to make that happen. So at the Age-Friendly Institute, which I now am the executive director, we're working to elevate all of those age-friendly initiatives and to think about how we rise all age-friendly boats to the benefit of older adults. And when we think about sort of the passion piece of it for me, you know, very simple. I want to build the age-friendly world I want to live in 20 years. And so I'm working to figure out how to do that, and working with my partner, Tim Driver, who's the president of the Age-Friendly Institute, to think about how we can elevate age-friendly initiatives in all sectors and to help foster enhanced collaboration. And we do that through a lot of different mechanisms we can talk about later on tonight that we think are pretty groundbreaking and we're very excited about as we move forward. So for me, this is extremely exciting, this next chapter of a career for me. And I'm so thrilled to be here to talk to you all about it.
Jody, that's amazing that you got your, I have to say I started as a master's after a law career when I was 40, and I was taking the GRE courses the same time my stepson was taking SATs, and it was like, that was a little daunting. So
that happened to me too. That happened to me too.
All right, thanks, Jody. Ashton, welcome. Thank you for joining us. I want to shift a little bit now to some of the common stereotypes, cultural stereotypes we have out there. I think you've all alluded to it a little bit about aging and cultural kind of ageist barriers. Now, you're a writer and an author and an expert and an activist against ageism. I'm curious, like, what brought you to this work and why are you doing it through activism?
Unlike Jody, I never had a plan. I never planned to become a writer. I certainly never imagined I would be a public speaker. So life takes you by surprise. If I could never figure out even what to major in college, and if you had told me that I would become fascinated by aging, I would have said, why do I want to think about something icky and depressing? But what happened is I got older, and in my mid-50s, I realized that I was incredibly apprehensive, this like sort of free-floating dread about all the awfulness that lay ahead. So being a nerdy person, I started interviewing people over 80 who work, and researching longevity, looking into it, looking at and learning about older people's lives, and learned in a matter of honestly weeks, months, if not weeks, that almost everything I thought I knew about being really old was flat out wrong or way off base. And so I got a bee in my bonnet, to say the least. I mean, the statistics that I started my TED Talk out with 10 years later still hold up. You know, that this and you want, you know, stereotypes that older people are depressed. Older people enjoy better mental health than the young or middle-aged, that people are happiest at the beginnings and the ends of their lives, and on and on. So I became obsessed with why so few people know these things, and why aging is framed as a problem, and who profits and who benefits from putting that message out in the culture. And I guess I became an activist because I got riled. You know, it just became obvious that the purveyors of those messages did not have our best interests at mind, individually or collectively, and it's not healthy or to go through life dreading our futures. And it's not that the scary stuff isn't real. It's that our fears are so out of proportion to the reality. And as I hope Becca will talk about, Becca Levy has done incredible research in this field. Those fears themselves make us more vulnerable to exactly what we fear. And that pissed me off too. So I was off and running.
Well, give us a sense of, like, what do you do for activism? Like, I
Well,
used to be a boring lawyer, so I don't know how to get out in the
oh
world.
God,
and actually do it.
it just kind of happens. I mean, I started as a blog with 0 readers. I gradually built up a social media presence. I know social media is the source of all evils, but in fairness, I had no professional affiliations and no education in the field. So I'm completely self-taught. But the blog enabled me to post, I thought out loud, so that presumably when scholars like Becca and experts like Marc looked at what I was doing, they could see I wasn't, making it up out of whole cloth. And gradually, I remember begging, like somebody would want to hear something. I did a monologue at a theater event, and people loved it. And I was like, oh geez, maybe I should talk about this. So it happened haphazardly, but I did continue to build my body of knowledge, and people, gradually became interested in what I had to say.
Excellent. I love that. A lot of different ways to go about kind of writing these other chapters for ourselves. Thank you. Becca, I want to turn to you. You're an academic researcher. You work on ageism and the psychology of aging, including the effects of stereotypes on one's health and longevity that Ashton was just referring to. So, how did you come to choose this area, and maybe kind of what are you learning about it that's so interesting? Please share.
Sure, thank you. Well, first of all, yeah, Rachel, thank you so much for putting this together, and it's great to be part of this panel. It's really exciting to have these different perspectives on purpose and meaning in later life. So, so great to be here, and also wonderful that so many people are joining us from different parts of the country. So, so let's see. So I first became interested in this topic when I was in graduate school, and I had the opportunity to go to Japan. So I had a National Science Foundation fellowship that allowed me to go to Japan, and I decided that would be a good country to go to because at the time it had the longest lifespan. And the first thing that I noticed when I arrived there was how differently the older people were treated by the culture. So I was very surprised at how much respect and admiration and positive views of aging were part of the culture, as opposed to a lot of the ageism that I had observed in where I was living before, in different ways in the culture. So, so I became really interested in the idea that maybe one of the determinants of this longer lifespan, people living longer and having better well-being in later life, that maybe it's connected to these cultural beliefs about aging. And so starting with that premise, that hypothesis, I became really interested in, if that is actually the case, that our culture has a strong impact on aging well, then how can I look at this scientifically? And so that became a mission for me to try to think about how do we actually study this idea that culture has beliefs that we can't necessarily see them, but they could be having such a strong impact on older person's health and well-being. So that's something that I've felt very passionate about trying to understand, both because I think the ageism can have harmful impacts on older individuals, but also because the reverse is true. So we've also found evidence that in positive age cultures, or when there's positive age beliefs, that can have many important benefits to older people.
Excellent, thank you. I'm sure we're going to get back to you and some of the specifics of the research you've been doing, and I know you have a book coming up, so we'd like to hear some more about that. But I want to kind of talk to a few things that each of you has kind of touched on a little bit. Is that there is data, I understand, in place, since you were the experts, that we know people are living longer lives right now than we did, particularly 60 years ago, and then that there are various studies that people in our country are living these age segregated lives. I know, Marc, you called it age apartheid, I believe, and that many of both extremes. There are studies that showing, juveniles and adolescents are feeling particularly isolated and lonely, and that elderly are increasingly lonely and isolated. And yet there are other studies that also show, and Ashton, you'd said this, is that people in later years have better mental health and new purpose and engagement than they did when they were younger. It's that curve, right? Or the reverse curve. and also compare it to earlier cohorts. So I'm curious, and anybody could take this up. What is your perspective on, are both of those true? Why and how? And what do we do with that? Or how are you, maybe how you're addressing it? We can take it that way. Becca, since I have you on the screen, do you want to start?
Sure. Well, yes. So I think you did say things that are definitely true. So, I mean, we do have an epidemic of loneliness and isolation for older people and for all age groups in our country. So that is a real phenomenon. And I think you're also correct, as Ashton and Marc were talking about. I mean, are these strengths that have been researched and observed of mental health and purpose and connections and emotional intelligence. A lot of things do increase in later life, but I think there's also just a lot of variability in the older population. So we know that there are people who are aging particularly well and have wonderful health and well-being, and then there are many people who are denied the opportunities to have greater health and well-being. Even though I think they have the strengths, I think we've got a lot of structural impediments that keep people from enjoying those opportunities in later life. So I think all of those things are true, but I think understanding why some people in later life are able to find meaning and pursue those passions and other people are prevented with such things as ageism, I think is really, really important to understand.
Go ahead. I see all of you nodding your heads. Ashton, you want to go?
Not just ageism, but of course the way it intersects with other forms of oppression, ableism in particular. The pandemic really woke me up that, the early messaging, don't worry, it's only going to affect the old and the ill. And ill is a proxy for disabled people. And in fact, a lot of our apprehension about getting older is worry about how our minds and bodies may change. And that's not actually ageism, that's ableism, right? Because lots of young people are disabled, plenty of older people escape serious incapacity. So it's really important to look at the way all these forms of these barriers to aging well affect not only who gets to age at all, right? And who has access to leisure and good health care and all those things, all this stuff. I think we tend, in the US, we're a very capitalist, consumer-oriented society, the well-off among us, and I am in that category. I think there's a lot of doctrine around sort of successful aging, positive aging, think the right things, exercise, eat enough kale, have purpose, and you will, age well, which really means continuing to look and act like a younger version of yourself, which really means to not age, which is sort of a high-end version of denial. And that's available. It overlooks the role that class and luck has a lot to do with how well we age, right? And this, doctrine that it's all up to us, and if we do the right things, we won't age, stigmatizes the inevitable changes that await us in some degree and in some fashion, utterly variably. And they also divide us, back to isolation. Ageism, like all prejudice, pits us against each other. In this case, old versus young. So young people think, I won't have anything in common with those old people. And older people think, oh, I would go over to those young people at a social event, but they won't want to talk to me. Give it a shot. It is ageism in the culture that wants us to think that way. And age has so little to do, in fact, with what we have in common.
Yeah, just to echo Ashton's comments and Becca's and what Jody was saying before, I feel like we're facing, both a failure of imagination and also a failure at the institutional level of innovation. In the middle of the last century, older people were viewed even more negatively in some ways than today. Lewis Mumford, the great urbanist, said in, I think, 1956, at no point in any society had any group been so rejected as older people today. And at that point, we were in the middle of the glorification of adolescence and invented the word teenager. So, this conception of later life as a kind of ersatz second youth, right? The graying as playing version of the golden years caught on, and it went hand in hand with this radical age segregation that you mentioned, Rachel. Yeah, we started the 20th century as one of the most age integrated societies in the world and ended it arguably the most age segregated. And they went ahead and, you go to a place like the Villages, which is just reported in the recent census to be the fastest growing metropolitan area in America. And the idea of being having a second childhood is very much enabled by the idea of there being no actual children present. So we've chopped up the stages of life in this way, which I think, again, to echo Ashton, it just encourages younger people don't know older people, especially outside of their family. It's hard to see a full sense of life. And so I think we've got to both, be much more imaginative about how we think about the whole life course, but we've got to be as creative in bringing people together across age as we've been separating them out. We invented senior centers, nursing homes, retirement communities, on and on and on. Often, it wasn't a nefarious plot. We thought that everybody would be better off if older people were out of the way with other older people. And so, I think that's the exciting thing about this moment. It's not just a chance to rethink, the various stages of life, but also how we organize daily life in this country and elsewhere.
I agree. And one of the things that oh, sorry, Rachel.
Just quickly, I was going to say we should have ads for your guys' stuff in our alumni magazines rather than all these like retirement centers that everybody's pushing us. But anyway, go ahead, Jody. Yeah. Sorry.
Well, one of the things I was going to say about, how do we think about combating that ageism that leads to separate and segregated communities of ages and things of this nature? When we talk about the age-friendly movement, whatever setting we're talking about the age-friendly, as I've said, and many people have said, something that's good for a baby jogger on a street is also good for a walker or a wheelchair. And so stopping to think about how these age-friendly initiatives benefit all ages is a really important piece of the work that we do, I think, because the more we can advance age-friendly solutions in all settings, the better off we all are, because it creates an opportunity for generations to be together, work together. For example, how do we create more age-friendly workplaces? We did a survey recently where we discovered that 7 out of 10 respondents were interested in continuing to work and would do so if given flexible work environments post-COVID. That's fascinating. Not only does that address this issue of isolation, but it's also got massive policy ramifications when we think about, people who are able to and interested in continuing to work in their later years from an economic perspective. So there's so many reasons that these issues and efforts to combat ageism benefit all sorts of ages as we think about, what do we want for the workforce of the future? How do we generate a workforce where we have institutional knowledge and wisdom that can be handed to uprising generations? Lots of companies that we talk to, because we run a certification program for age-friendly employers, lots of companies say to us, look, we're so used to starting our recruiting efforts in the post-college sector, but that's not going to work for us anymore. So we have to radically rethink where and how we recruit. And we're looking at this population of individuals who has so much to offer and has a desire and a willingness to be back in the workforce. People talk a lot about the Great Resignation, and we've heard tons about that after COVID. Well, we're starting to think about the Great Reconsideration. There's lots of people who are thinking, well, maybe it doesn't have to look like it looked for the last 30 years, but it can look like something different. So how do we tee up those opportunities sort of from a systems perspective?
No, that's amazing. And I was just looking at the Stanford report, which you guys all seem to know about, the new map of life. And Becca, you're a researcher, so you probably, a lot of you guys get these things faster than I do. Thinking of a lot of the issues they were talking about really had to do with our culture and our policies. And this is what I keep coming, everything you guys are talking about, it's culture and or it's policy. These are big issues, and they affect more than just a particular age cohort. Ashton, you're go ahead. You want to say something?
They go together, of course, policy and culture. You can't separate one out from another. I think it's really important to reflect on how new this longevity is. It has happened in the blink of an eye. In the Paleolithic era, humans evolved to have a third living generation, and that's when art and music happened. And in our lifetimes, we are seeing 4 and even 5 living generations with all the challenges and the incredible opportunities that presents. So I think sort of a big takeaway from that Stanford report and Laura Carstenson's work in general is that roles and institutions have yet to evolve to support this. And I really see it as a critical window of opportunity to frame longer lives. There are real challenges. The scary stuff is real, but also as this opportunity that, I mean, unprecedented is a word that's gotten an awful lot of work out since the pandemic. Obviously, almost everything is unprecedented, changes in the workplace, et cetera. But we really do have an astonishing opportunity. And I love Marc's use of the word creatively to think big about not just the mixed age workforce, but the more age equitable, all age friendly world, society, social life, recreational life, the whole kit and caboodle that, as you say, we all hope to live long enough to inhabit.
Becca, I want to say, like, from the sort of the findings you're pulling from the research, and obviously your initial interest in other cultural potential influences on what's going on with longevity, is that getting out there? Is it making a difference? Is it getting to inform organizations that Jody's organization and Marc and people can use? Are you sensing a shift in people getting it rather than just, the five of us here talking about this?
I think little by little it is getting out there. I mean, part of the reason that I wrote the book that you mentioned is to try to get the message out. So we have all these research findings that I think are really important that show that age beliefs impact health, and so part of my ideal is to get beyond journal pages, which is what I usually target as a scientist, and to try to think about how to reach people who don't necessarily read the academic journals. And I think another thing that we've tried to do is recently we did an economic analysis. So our hope is that by putting a dollar amount on how ageism impacts health, that's a way to give evidence to policymakers that hopefully will inspire them, give them the information that will help really bring about change. And then, yes, and of course, the important work that the other panelists are doing to get the message out, I think is going to make a really big difference.
Where in policies does this happen? I mean, Jody did some stuff in the state level. Like, where's this influencing? I mean, obviously we've got some cultural shifts. We want to get the word and get people to kind of shift their mindset, but you can only do so much, unless you've got major shifts of housing allocation, transportation, social security. I mean, you name it. So go ahead. Anybody wants to jump in?
I got an idea for you. Well, one of the things that I got an idea. So one of the things that we're talking about a lot is that there's incredible work happening at the framework level, at the systems level, to establish important, meaningful, and impactful programs to serve this really fast growing population of older adults. And that's amazing. That's like incredible that that's happening, because I think this realization about the demographic change that is upon us is real, and it's fantastic that the response has been what it is. However, what we are lacking at this point is a bottom-up reaction to it. So this is what's happening from a development of age-friendly, for example, programs, policies, etc. But what do older adults think about this? One of the things that was very striking to me when I was working in the state of Rhode Island was that we would always talk about this idea of listening to older adults, really listening to older adults before we develop policies or before we develop programs, because of course, we should not be developing programs and policies that don't reflect the needs and wants of older adults. It's like a basic tenet of not being ageist. So, but what that kind of meant for us when we did our research often was going to senior centers or going to other places where older adults were congregating with a clipboard and asking them lots of questions and doing focus groups. And it always sort of irked me, because it felt like that was just this one moment in time where we asked a series of questions and we heard some feedbacks, and then we'd say, okay, this is what older adults think, so let's march forward and develop a program. And I felt like there had to be a better way. And one of the things we're doing at the Age Friendly Institute is thinking about how we capture the voice of older adults at scale by tapping into, the enormous power of the internet. So we're developing this consumer-facing Yelp-like engine. Like, okay, the city and town says it's age friendly because they've adopted these principles of age friendliness. Well, what do you think? What's it really like to live in this city or town? Or what's it really like to get healthcare from this provider who claims to be age friendly? And how do we use the voice of older adults to really accelerate change at the systems level by marrying the top down with the bottom up? And that's where I think we can really accelerate change fast, because if we start to enable older adults to find solutions that work for them and demand solutions where they aren't already existing, then we're going to see, you know, a rapid acceleration in the policy side of things to meet that desire.
I'll throw out
Marc, did you? Yeah, please.
I'll throw out a you know, kind of in the spirit of that earlier conversation too, about the ways that policy and culture interact. You know, so I'm a huge fan of Social Security. My grandmother survived only because of Social Security. So I don't want to come off as negative, but when Social Security was created in the 1930s, you know, a big part of the motivation was to get older people out of the workplace at a time we had over 20% unemployment rates in young people, and people were worried about, you know, a revolution. And you know, it fed a whole set of institutions that, you know, contributed to wall off older people from society. You know, I think we need to, you know, think about, suppose we made it possible for people to take an early year of Social Security in their 50s, you know, and agree to work an actuarially adjusted period later, so that, you know, the cost would be neutral in order to go back to school, right? So that essentially you turn it into a GI Bill for older people. Then you'd have all these people who want to, you know, to say, there's this great Joseph Campbell line, midlife is when you get to the top of the ladder and discover it's leaning against the wrong wall. Well, you know, whether you get to the top of the ladder or not, a lot of people are ready for a shift, but they don't have the opportunity, especially if they're not well-to-do, to do that. Suppose we, you know, provided this opportunity for, that would change the whole culture of later life. It, you know, I always worry about fooling around with anything like Social Security, but I think we just need more creativity about, you know, John Chauvin at Stanford says, you know, we, you know, established 65 as the retirement age, the definition of old age in, you know, 1935. We'd never use $1935 in 2021 without adjusting them for inflation, yet we're treating, you know, this arbitrary number as like an eternal verite. But, you know, it's funny, listening to Jody, you know, we've been having exactly the opposite. I think what you're saying is true, but we're seeing all this small scale innovation at the grassroots level, you know, because we mostly work in the nonprofit world. People are coming up with brilliant ideas for rethinking housing, education, community engagement, but they're all so small, and how to get them scale. But the most encouraging thing I've seen recently, and, you know, maybe you all have a different impression of this, but PAPA, which is, you know, pairing college students with older people who are in danger of being lonely, socially disconnected, they've raised $240 million from the private markets. Their most recent valuation is $1.4 billion, and their motto is family on demand. They're not trying to sell it as anything other than deep social connection and building family-like relationships among older and younger people who aren't, you know, related in a traditional way. That I wonder if we're, you know, it's fitful, but maybe we're starting to see some of these innovations get to a, you know, a different level.
Jody, Ashton, Becca, do you guys want to keep going on some of these ideas, the sort of culture, the policy type things? We covered it. Okay, so I wanted, I do want to.
We got to work from the bottom up and the top down.
Yep.
Top down, girl.
Top down.
I mean, in the abstract, in the sense
right.
of the overall culture has to change, which is provoked by all these little tiny actions.
Mm-hmm.
It's good. And look, honestly, even just bringing 75 people together tonight, hopefully some things will spark and people can start to coalesce and share their resources and voices. I love the idea of a GI Bill for older people. I got to say, while I was juggling kids and trying to get a master's, it would have been, and you have to pay for it out of pocket, you know, which is ridiculous. And maybe at some stages you don't want to go get a PhD or something, but you could do something pretty productive in a shift. As Jody said, it can really help you change your trajectory if you get 2 years of education on a particular area. And that would make a huge difference when you're at an age where you have a huge amount of experience and you're ready and energy. So I'm all for that one. Ashton, before we move kind of shifting a little bit from ageism to other kind of opportunities, more positive thinking, this is all positive. Ashton, some people had some questions about internalized ageism. We've talked about like structures and stuff and the fact that there are effects of people's thinking, but let's, what are people actually thinking and what are some of those internalized ageisms? Ashton,
Well,
you want to start with that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, in all change, as the saying goes, starts inside each of us. We are all biased. We're all racist, at least I think that. And we all are bombarded in this culture with negative ideas about age and aging from childhood on, that it's sad to be old, that old people are depressed or incompetent or so on. And unless we stop to challenge those beliefs, they become part of our identity, typically unconsciously, right? And it's not pleasant to acknowledge that we're biased, but we can't challenge bias unless we're aware of it. And ageism is sort of the last prejudice to pop onto, broadly speaking, the social radar. There's tons of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives out there, and ageism is missing from them. Unless we stop to consider our own bias, we are not going to provoke all those little sparks each, because if we don't see it in ourselves, we don't understand how it manifests in the culture. Becca talks a lot about this with her stereotype embodiment theory. So I urge everyone to spend a little time thinking about your own attitudes towards age and aging, because that is where it begins. Think about how we use the words old and young. I don't feel old. What that really means is I don't feel incompetent. I don't feel ugly. I don't feel invisible. All ways that I felt worse when I was 13 than I do now at 69, for example. So, and once the thing is that once you start to see this bias in yourself, it is like letting a genie out of a bottle. Then you start to see it in the world around you. That's what consciousness raising did with the women's movement. That's what the personal is the political means. These are not personal problems. They're not personal failings. They are social and political and cultural issues that we can come together and do something about. So if we don't, internalized aging is crucial. We are all ageist, and the most important step each of us can take is to look at our own bias and get past the uncomfortable part, because it gets better.
Becca, what has some of your research shown about, what people think about themselves or how they think of aging? Obviously, you've had to figure out, or how do you test what a stereotype can do to someone for health and things like that? So what have you found?
Well, right. So as Ashton was just talking about, so we have found that these age beliefs that children take in as young as age 3 or 4 can have profound impacts in later lives. And it can go both directions, as I said. So there can be these negative messages that they're taking in, but there also can be, quite wonderful messages that they're taking in as well. And those could be fostered by programming such as what Marc is leading. And so, so I think, so in our research, the way that we've tried to look at it is we've looked at it cross-culturally. We've looked at it experimentally. So we actually activate different types of age beliefs on a computer screen, and we can activate either negative age stereotypes or positive age stereotypes that represent different cultural beliefs. And then we can look at before and after different types of health outcomes. And then we also follow people over decades. So there's been studies that have measured people's age beliefs early in life and then follow their health until later in life. And so we actually can look at the kinds of age beliefs that people take in at a very young age, and then the profound health impacts that they can have on later life. And we've looked at a number of different kind of health outcomes ranging from stress levels, cardiovascular health, and most recently we've been looking at biomarkers of dementia as well. And we do find that those who take in more positive age beliefs, who find that there's more meaning attached to aging, do much better in later life.
Excellent. I think we just lost Marc for a second, but let's get to, let's focus now on what is meaningful engagement, and what are some of these opportunities? I mean, that's kind of what we're here for, and that's why we started to do this program, and hopefully people are here for, is what are some of the ways? Jody, we can start with you. Like, and it's not just workforce, we're talking about meaningful engagement in sort of volunteer, social impact nonprofits, whatever it is that gives people a sense of meaning, as particularly as they're maybe in this have a longer life now and transitioning out of one career to the other and to do something. So any thoughts on that? Jody, you
want to lead with me? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean,
I
think that's one of the things about this work that I've been involved in, particularly when I was working in a state-based organization, was I was working with community leaders in cities and towns all over the state of Rhode Island. Now, there's only 39 cities and towns. It's a little state, but nonetheless, it was a really great little microcosm of what I believe to be happening in other places as well. And we just had people coming out of the woodwork because they were interested in thinking about how they could advance solutions that would benefit them in their later years. And we were really drawing from a wide range of demographic types. I mean, it wasn't just older volunteers, but it was certainly a really great way to get involved at the city or town level. And so I saw that as a really exciting and interesting way that people were thinking like, hey, wait, this isn't what I thought it was going to be, this getting older process. And there's lots of different ways to engage that feel comfortable to me or that tap into my existing core competencies. It doesn't always have to mean starting something new, starting from scratch, starting a blog that becomes a mega hit. There's so many different ways to put skills to bear, and they exist everywhere. So I think that's one of the things that we think a lot about is how do we start to raise awareness of those opportunities for individuals to pursue the lifelong passions that they may not have had the opportunity to pursue earlier in their lives, but can take advantage of when they may have a little time. But to your point, look, we haven't really touched on in this conversation the equity piece of all of this and how that plays into the work that we all do, because we know, as Ashton has said, there are just systemic barriers to people enjoying, if that's the right word, their later years, because I think that's a little bit of a misnomer for a lot of people, because getting older can also just be really, really hard. And this idea that it has to be this wonderful, glorious time of life when you get to finally pursue your passions might also just not be true, and might be glossing over some of these systemic challenges that really impact certain communities more than others, without a doubt.
Absolutely.
I love that point. I think it's really important not to, a lot of the coverage of that Becca just referred to about beliefs towards aging is typically framed as positive attitudes towards aging. And to me, that smacks a little of gray washing, just sort of papering over the scary stuff. And I think it's really important to address the whole story. And I refer to those attitudes as fact rather than fear-based, because it really is about what the data shows. I think Becca is too modest to blow her horn about my favorite of her findings, which she alluded to, that people with fact rather than fear-based attitudes towards aging are less likely to develop dementia, even if they have the gene that predisposes them to the disease, which is just amazing to me. And into your question about engagement, I do see this through an ageism lens because that's my specialty. But if we don't see ourselves as capable of continuing to pursue a career, or if we confront systemic age discrimination, those are different forms of ageism that stand in their way. So I want to let people know about a website called the Old School Clearinghouse, oldschool.info, which is hundreds of free vetted resources, tools, videos, workshops. Everything is free except the books to educate people about age bias and how to dismantle it. Where you can find, you don't have to want to be an age activist. That's, God knows it's not for everyone, and the world would be intolerable if it were full of activists. But there are loads of organizations doing really interesting things around age and aging, and you can find them there, oldschool.info.
Okay, we will definitely add that to the resource. We're going to provide a lot of resources later, so please feel free to shout them out. If anybody in the audience has other ideas, let us know. Marc, I'm glad you came back. We lost you for a second.
I'm sorry about that. It seems like my internet went down.
Okay, good, because now we're talking about sort of positive, what are the opportunities? Someone asked a question earlier that'd love for you to elaborate that, that you said something about the fact that older people have exactly the qualities and characteristics that young people need. And maybe Jody, you can do this too. And obviously, what is it about age-friendly, organizations that do you have to change what the work is, or is it they're just not tapping into and what are those qualities? But Marc, let's start with you with like, what are some of these opportunities that sort of untapped potential?
When I was earlier, I was focusing specifically on this cross-generational connection. And, there was, when I first started, there was so much that young people needed the support of adults. But what I discovered later, and I've been continuing to discover as I've become a 63-year-old, is that, we need to be irrationally crazy about young people just as much as young people need that kind of support from us. And as we get to this time in life, a set of skills, our knees may creak a little more and our eyesight might not be as as sharp as it once was, but
We're losing your audio, Marc.
It's because he lives somewhere so remote, San Francisco.
I know.
Where's that?
So Jody, go ahead. Well, until Marc comes back, why don't you let us know? So tell me some of these kinds of, the opportunities, the untapped potential, what's going on there. Oh, hey, Marc.
Okay, so
I'm so sorry about the technical problems. I was just saying that. I'm sorry, Jody.
I said continue on. We're glad you're back.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, I was just saying that it turns out that as we get to this point in life when there's less time ahead than behind, there's a natural tendency to move towards emphasizing relationship and the importance, and then skills critical to those bonds like emotional regulation, empathy, blossom as we get older. And then there's also a direction to all that connection that the Harvard study of adult development has shown that older people who connect with younger ones are 3 times as likely to be happy as those who fail to do so. So this whole impulse towards connecting across generational lines is not only something that we older people oftentimes get better at, but also is a source of our own happiness.
Becca, have you studied any of those kind of cross-generational or exposure to younger people and vice versa?
Yes, I mean, so that's a really, strong literature that supports Marc's wonderful efforts in this area. So there was a recent American Journal of Public Health report that reviewed all this literature and found that intergenerational context was definitely one of the best ways to reduce ageism. So, and to promote well-being and happiness as well.
For reasons that are intuitively obvious.
Yeah. We did a survey recently and we asked our members, how important it is for them to think about spending time with members of a variety of different generations. And 67% of respondents to that survey rated being in the company of younger generations as important or very important. And when we drilled down a little bit further, we asked among those younger groups, other than your family, which age range of people do you prefer to interact with the most? And the biggest winner was spending times with 20-somethings and 30-somethings. So it's just so interesting, far and away, the aim is to be living, working, and thriving in intergenerational ways. I don't know that many people who want to, looking forward to a lifetime of, being in a facility with just older people. So I think there's a lot to be learned. Yeah, exactly. Good point. Marc, you raised that point earlier, fastest growing zip code, right, in the USA, but interesting.
So let's talk about, so what are some of these opportunities? How do older people get, to start in this path? We're talking about like checking your own biases. Yes, it's good to be with younger or different generations. And if it's not your family, if people aren't going to like religious places as much, so Jody, maybe like the workplace now, don't forget that, but not everybody wants to work, but if they do, there are opportunities, or people doing it individually. So obviously we want to look at age-friendly certified companies if you're in looking, do you guys do nonprofits too, or just
Both, yes.
for-profit?
We are the only certification program in the country for employers to be designated as specifically age friendly. So it's a process that companies go through. It's great. And actually, oh yeah, we have a list on our website, and it's really interesting because Ashton, you talked a little bit about ageism, and you talk a lot about ageism, but one of the things that we're finding with DE&I initiatives, and one of the reasons that our certification program is growing, we think as fast as it is that increasingly age is being perceived as an element of diversity. And so we're getting a tremendous amount of interest from companies who are thinking about those DE&I initiatives and thinking about how they can incorporate age diversity into the mix. So that's a really interesting factoid. Of course, that's, an employment environment, which is different necessarily. Some people aren't interested in employment. For those who are, though, it's a really terrific place to start because you know that you're dealing with companies who have expressed an interest, in a workforce that is more age diverse in the first place.
That's a good way to start. Marc, can you talk about some of the programs, like how do people get involved in some of these intergenerational programs that you've done or ones that have been migrated back over to the AARP?
Yeah, well, we earlier on I talked about Experience Corps, which is a service program involving older people and helping young people read by the 3rd grade, and it's in 24 cities now. It's run by the AARP Foundation, but there's so many other initiatives that are underway. Some of the most interesting are in the housing realm. There is an initiative out of Boston, which is now in Columbus, Ohio. Seattle is expanding, called Nesterly, which pairs older people who have room to spare in their house and could use some help with college students, graduate students who pay reduced rent in high rent areas, and in return provide some chores to the older people. But it's really all a kind of crucible to build relationships. Increasingly, there are co-housing and other housing arrangements that are bringing generations together. I visited an assisted living CCRC community in Cleveland called Judson Manor, which has graduate students in the local conservatory and art school living in the facility, and ostensibly to play concerts and to put art on the walls, but in fact the real result is these deep bonds that grow. And I think this combination of proximity and purpose is so important, being near people of different generations, but also near people of different generations where there's a common interest, whether it's in service, in the cultural arts, and we need to have more opportunities to do those things.
I couldn't agree more, and I think the phrase that jumped out at me, Marc, is a common interest. We know that the most important aspect of a good old age is not health and it's not wealth. It is having a solid social network. And one of the ways to ensure that we have that is to have friends of all ages. And it's easier said than done, but it is one way. I mean, as we age, friends we've known all our life do die. And also, of course, as we've already discussed, intergenerational friendships, all age-friendly communities, as you talk about, Jody, are ways to bring the different ages together. So just because you're over 55 doesn't mean you have to look for activities or housing or whatever that is focused at your demographic. Think of something you like to do, think of a place you want to be, and find a mixed age group to do it with. And that way you forge these organic relationships that are based not in some sort of artificial thing of like, hello, young person, I want to be with you because you're younger, but let's develop a community initiative. Let's go birdwatch, whatever it happens to be. And that's, of course, what friendships are all about.
I think that's beautiful. And I'm going to take that, Ashton, as my way to kind of help wrap up a little bit here. So we've got a lot of ways for people to start thinking about ageism, to address it, to figure out and help with the cultural and the policy shifting that needs to take place in this country. And for people individually, we're starting to talk about some places they can do it. Looks like clearly spending time with different generations is going to help with the mindset and a lot of other things. So even if for people out there, if you're looking about, well, what am I actually getting involved with? taking some of these opportunities to work or to be around people might spark some ideas and certainly will put you in a better mindset, and that's both sides. Looks like we've got Experience Core. We're going to certainly add some resources when we send this out for people who are looking specifically, and some of these other organizations. You know, even things like the Yale Day of Service, and I know Harvard and other schools have this. It's become a year-long way to get involved, and it usually depends on the local Yale club. So if you're, no matter where you are in the world, there's probably some volunteer opportunities. A lot of those are family inclusive and different ages. I would say, you know, YANA is a community. I mean, we have generations of people. We're here all because we care about social impact, and it brings together people. And I would encourage people to sign up for our networking program next Tuesday evening, because we're going to do breakout rooms on interest, and people meet. You could be, I don't care what age you were. So we get students who will talk with someone who's an expert in, environment, climate issues, and is doing engineering or something. I mean, all sorts of things. People come together, and it has nothing to do with identity, your class year, your gender, any of that stuff. And also, I will. It's on our website, but we're looking for people who are professionals and have other skills they want to offer. We're going to start bringing together kind of a nonprofit consulting. So we know there are a lot of small nonprofits out there who just can't afford consultants, they can't afford accountants, they can't afford marketing, and they need both experienced folks to help with things and younger people to help with some technology and some of the new things. So feel free to sign up with one of our forums. Would be great to have more people. We'll look to see if we can provide some other ways for people to get involved. And obviously from the nonprofit sector, boards and committees and volunteering at those levels. I know Jody's nodding at your organization, you know, in hospitals, there's in nonprofits, there's tons of ways to get involved if it's something you're already interested in. And Ken and I do lots of discussions with people one-on-one. So if you've got some ideas, give us a call. I've got 8,000 people in my network, and through these lovely people we have with us today, if I don't know something or someone, I'm sure through them and anyone else, we could get you some ideas about where you might want to engage with your talent and your interests. Any other last comments or thoughts from our panelists? You guys were terrific. I really want to say thank you for joining us and for sharing your wisdom. Last comments, Betty and Marc, you want to say something?
Well, I just want to put in a plug for a new effort called The Third Act, which has been created by Bo McKibben, the legendary climate activist, to mobilize older people to work with younger generations on climate. And we'll be doing an event next week, next Thursday at 1 p.m. Pacific time with Bill and some young climate activists about how the generations could come together to work on that issue.
Excellent. Anyone else? Any other plugging? You know, Becca, you've got a book coming out. Ashton's got a book. Go to her website. We're going to get that resource linked out for the Old School Clearinghouse so people have access to more resources. But again, just wanted to say we're at the end of our hour. Thank you very much. Keep up the good work. I hope we can have some more conversations about this going forward, and let's hopefully we can change some of these cultural and policy issues, because if I'm age forward too, like as Jody said, I would like to help build the world that we're all going to hopefully
we are.
be in.
We're doing it. Thanks for having us. Thanks for having me,
Thanks everyone.
Rachel.
Have a great evening. Happy Hanukkah to those who celebrate.
Nice
Have a
to
great
see you
day.
all.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.